We are taking a way too early look at the Dolphins' 2024 schedule and predicting the outcome of each game now that the schedule's been unleashed here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. You can also find me with long-form written content over on Substack at Touchdown Miami. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. We are taking a look at the Dolphins' schedule here today on Locked On Dolphins. A way too early. There's a lot that's going to change between now and week one against Jacksonville, which is September 8th at 1 p.m. There's a lot that's going to change for the Dolphins for sure, presumably for Jacksonville. They've been busy this offseason. They're a team that's added quite a bit and kind of churned their roster around a little bit. But that's to be said for Miami as well. And this entire schedule brings a plethora of storylines for Miami and the games that they are going to have to play in their bid to return to the postseason yet again, hopefully capture a division championship this season, and hopefully secure a playoff win this season. The former would help the latter. Playing at home in the postseason would help. So let's dive right into it, right? We have 4 quarters to the season, just like when we reviewed the schedule on Wednesday night when it came out. Look at this from a quarterly basis. We are going to put the 17th game for in quarter 1, put it up front because they have a bye in week 6. It's the most logical time to kind of tug it in. So as a reminder, quarter 1 of the Miami Dolphins season, 5 games. Home against Jacksonville, home on Thursday, the following week against Buffalo, just a few days later. And they get some extra rest before they take their first West Coast road trip to Seattle. And then they come home and they get an extra day of rest for Monday Night Football at home against the Tennessee Titans before going to Foxborough in week 5 to play the New England Patriots. That's your first 5 games. And as I look at this block of games, I could see the pathway for taking a feat to Jacksonville. The pathway to losing to Buffalo is obvious. They've beat you almost every time you've played them. Tennessee beat you last year. And Seattle is West Coast trip at home. So there is a storyline for each one of those games that I think does weigh on you. And you do get leery about just locking things in. But I think the storylines and the pros, particularly in this first quarter of the season for Miami versus the cons, I find a lot more pros to work with. And even the cons are mitigated by other dynamics, like we mentioned the travel. You have extra rest in front of and behind the West Coast trip. As a standalone in week 3, that's hard to beat, right? You get a short week in week 2, but it's at home on Thursday at the very beginning of the season, when Miami traditionally under Mike McDaniel the past 2 seasons has had new layers that teams have to adjust to and catch up to. So you can put me down for a win in week 1 against Jacksonville. There's a lot of new in the wide receiver room between Brian Thomas and Gabe Davis as new receivers in that scheme. They've got a lot of returning on the defensive side of the ball, plus the addition of Eric Armstead. They probably feel very excited about that. But they do have Ryan Nielsen as the new defensive coordinator. And I do consider Tyson Campbell, Ronald Darby, Darnell Savage, Antonio Johnson. I think Miami's speed on the perimeter is enough for them, where I like that matchup for the Dolphins quite a bit. I like their ability to attack Jacksonville's secondary to mitigate their pass rush, in addition to needing to find out what else is going to be different about the Dolphins' protection this upcoming season. And then the newness, and then a new center in Mitch Morse, previously in Buffalo, playing his first game in Jacksonville in this system on the road in Miami. You give me the Dolphins at home. I'll take Miami to go 1-0 on the season. Now, I have made a rule of thumb with myself. I will not pick the Dolphins to beat the Bills until they do. It's just I'm not playing the game anymore, right? Um, but we went over when the schedule and this game in particular was revealed because it was revealed on Tuesday. Uh, Miami at home on a short week, early in the season, with all of the newness on both sides for both of these teams. I think you can make the argument that Miami, while they've lost this offseason, Buffalo has lost more significant volume of players on both sides of the ball. And they did come into this offseason a little bit tighter in the cash. And they'll get some relief with, I believe it's Tre'Davious White numbers in post-June 1st. So we'll see what they do with that. But I see the pathway for Miami winning the football game. But I'm not going to pick them to win the football game because y'all got to win one before I start buying in again. Right. And the last time I said that, I think was 2022, and they ended up winning the early season game at home. So we'll see. But I like the rebound with the extra rest to go play against Seattle. When you consider Seattle's strength right now, their offensive line experiencing a lot of turnover. Laken Tomlinson, Christian Haynes, Olu Owolitami as your projected interior trio. None of them were starters for the team last year. Owolitami is a second year player, 5th round pick. Christian Haynes is a rookie this year. Obviously, Abraham Lucas has some injury questions for them. Their strength is in the wide receiver room. They do have a physical running back in Kenneth Walker, but I think between Noah Fant and Kenneth Walker, Miami's revamped linebacker room matches up pretty well. And again, I look at the kind of receivers that they have, and Mike McDonald implementing a new system, the kinds of secondary players that they have. I just think that's a drastic change where we've heard Anthony Weaver talk about the foundational elements of what they're going to do from a scheme perspective does have some overlap to what the Dolphins did last season. I like Miami in that game on the road with the extra rest going to Seattle on the West Coast before coming home. And I will indeed pick them to get their revenge against the Tennessee Titans on Monday night. Tennessee is a team that has spent, I think, more than anybody else between Calvin Ridley and Tyler Boyd and Tony Pollard in free agency. And then you consider trading for L'Jarius Sneed and signing Chidobe Awuzie. This is a team that's revamped themselves quite a bit in year one under Brian Callahan coming in. But I think all that newness is a blessing and a curse for Tennessee. I think they'll be better for it, for sure. But quarterback Will Levis in a new scheme. I look at their defense and I kind of question how their safeties and linebackers will hold the middle of the field. And again, they're not running the scheme with the players that they ran last year. And even if they did, I think one of the things that stood out to me about Mike McDaniel last year in the season opener against LA was how he responded to the team that gotcha, right? And the Brandon Staley game plan that kind of broke the Dolphins offense. And then they broke it back the following year with the Chargers fully healthy. I think there will be an element of that with these players that do overlap, but there's a lot that is new as well. And then against New England, they're another team that just has a lot of new. They're pretty stable on defense, but they don't have Bill Belichick calling the shots anymore. I think there's a coaching downgrade there, even though the talent is the same. They're trying to implement a new offense, whether it's Jacoby Brissett or Drake May. They really just don't have the perimeter weapons. They got a lot of youth there. I think that plays into Miami's advantage as well. So I'll pick them to win that game as well. So I have the Dolphins at 4-1 through the first 5 weeks, the first quarter of the season. And I can absolutely see how you could have the Dolphins sitting at 5-0. I think if you're less than 4-1, you're probably feeling like you're behind schedule in the first quarter of the season for the Dolphins. We're going to shift gears, go to quarter two, where the Dolphins are on the road after the bye. To start quarter two, we'll go weeks 6 through 10 next year on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you stick with us. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL. The Panthers trying to close out the Bruins tonight in Game 6 to go on to meet the New York Rangers in the conference finals for the NHL. Let's go Cats. Let's get that done. FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Miami out of the bye goes to Indianapolis. And they will face a Colts team that has a good offensive line. They kind of had their rebound. They kind of figured out Bernard Raymond, got some promising looks last year as a young player. But I think about Indianapolis with Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor and wanting to run the ball. And they get these big athletic tight ends. I do wish they had a little bit more on the perimeter. And they have a lot of youth between A.D. Mitchell as a second-round pick and Josh Downs. And they used a 5th-round pick on Anthony Gould from Oregon State. There is some dynamic explosiveness on the perimeter. But I wish you had more proven commodities there to test the Dolphins' defense in different ways. And then defensively, the secondary is so young between Juju Brents and Jalen Jones and Dallas Flowers. These are all corner. These are like the top corners on this football team. Kenny Moore, being in the nickel, is a great nickel player. But is he definitively going to help you cover Odell, Tyreek, and Jalen Waddle? I'm not sure. They have a lot of speed at linebacker, but I do think this is a group that you can get the edge on a little bit. I think you have some athleticism opportunities against some heavy-handed, but not the most dynamic edge players. I think Latu's kind of a big wild card there for the Colts. And obviously you're playing them in Indianapolis, but you're playing them in Indianapolis off the bye. I think that helps. I'll pick the Dolphins to win that game as well. That would move them to 5-1 on the season before they are home against the Arizona Cardinals. And Arizona, in the midst of their rebuild, tremendous amount of volume as far as the draft picks that they have made in the last 2 years. This year alone, Marvin Harrison Jr., Darius Robinson, Max Melton, Elijah Jones, Trey Benson, Tip Ryman, Isaiah Adams. These are all like 1st, 2nd, and 3rd round picks. And they're meaningful players. And they're really going to need the offensive line to come together. They signed Jonah Williams in free agency to play their left tackle spot to go with Paris Johnson as the other tackle. But I look at the interior and I have a lot of questions for Arizona. I look at the wide receivers beyond Zay Jones, who they just signed in free agency, and Marvin Harrison Jr. I have a lot of questions. This is a team who I think is probably 2 years away from all of their youth maturing. And because of that, I will pick the Dolphins to win that game as well. Sitting at 7-1 through the first 8 weeks of the season, or 6-1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-1 before going to Orchard Park to play the Bills. Y'all know the story there. So now you're 6-2. We're just not interested in any of the karma that's associated there. And then we said it earlier this week. You haven't won in Orchard Park. You have not won since 2016. So I think there's enough trends and evidence there, especially if you do steal the first game. So I'll pick the Buffalo Bills to win that game as well. And look, I'm looking for the inspiration for me to change my mind. But they dropped that game last year at the end of the year, and I said, we're going to go back to the old standard template of just not picking them, regardless of how many pathways you could see to them winning the game. Until they do it, I don't care. So that will put the Dolphins through 9 weeks at 6-2 before a Monday night tilt, the other West Coast trip, again, with a rest break at your advantage for a West Coast trip. You get an extra day to play the game before you come home for 2 games in a row. And you play the Rams. I think this as far as the primetime games for Miami this year, this one I think has the opportunity to be the most entertaining because I think the Rams offensively, with Nakua and Cooper Kupp and a supersized interior offensive line and a reinvestment in the running game with Blake Corum to go with Kyron Williams and Matthew Stafford at quarterback, this is a team that can test anybody, right? But I do have some expectations that with Raheem Morris gone, no longer the defensive coordinator, and Aaron Donald gone, and obviously Jalen Ramsey's gone, I'll read the too deep for the Rams defense this year and know that Chris Shula is the defensive coordinator, not Raheem Morris, who, for my money, is one of the best defensive play callers in the league. Braden Fiske, Bobby Brown, Kobe Turner was a really good rookie last year. Jared Verse, Christian Roseboom, Ernest Brown, Byron Young, Darius Williams, Cameron Curl, Russ Yeast, the ghost of Tre'Davious White, Quentin Lake. That's the projected starters for the Rams defense. I expect points. I expect a lot of points. And I think Miami can go in and win this football game. Obviously, they did not beat Kyle Shanahan the first time that Mike McDaniel played him. You will have the opportunity to go over and win a big game for your head coach. I think the lack of established talent on the defense, even though this is a mid-season game, hurts the Rams. And I'll pick in a shootout. I'll pick the Dolphins to win that game, which would put you at 7-2 before coming home for 2 games at home against the Raiders and the Patriots. That is the start of quarter 3. We're going to talk about that next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins, so make sure that you stick with us. Passion, drive, and patience are not just the formula for winning championships. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit available only to U.S. customers. So through 10 weeks and 9 games, we have the Dolphins at 7-2, which is familiar territory when you consider this team over the past couple of seasons has found themselves at 7-3 and 8-2 or 8-3, 9-3 this past year, 8-3 to the past 2 seasons. I do think they get to 8-3 again. Well, I think you get better than 8-3. I have you beating both the Raiders and the Patriots at home. Obviously, the big story for the Raiders is Christian Wilkins and his return to Miami and whether or not he completely destroys the Dolphins' interior offensive line with all the questions that you have there. I would tactfully point out that one of Aaron Brewer's better games last season in Tennessee at center was against the Dolphins. And I know they ran some pick stunts and knocked him around a little bit, but I watched him pass set on Christian Wilkins on several occasions, and I got the film clips. They're up over on Touchdown Miami. I did a whole story on Aaron Brewer and his fit with the Dolphins scheme and the narratives around him in pass protection. And you're home. So the sound element of an equalizer is going to be on his side this time when those two guys play each other. And I thought he handled his business the first time. So that element, while I acknowledge its significance and its interest, I think is a little secondary to what the Raiders are going to be able to do on offense with a quarterback situation of Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. You don't have Josh Jacobs this time around. They didn't add anything to the wide receiver room that was here the last time. They really just added some reinforcements on their offensive line by signing Andrews Pete and Cody Whitehair and drafting Jackson Powers Johnson to a group last year. But you lost the best player, and you have Gardner Minshew as your answer at quarterback. I just don't know that Luke Getsy as the coach is going to get this team scoring enough points with consistency. And obviously they have Devontae Adams here. They've added Michael Gallup, I guess, to the wide receiver room. That's like their big addition. I think that maybe is a hard-nosed game, but I think I would pick Miami to win it at home. And then the Patriots coming to town, I think you have a pretty good chance of seeing Drake May this time around. I think that only helps Miami's chances just because of the inexperience. They will have themselves, the Dolphins, more complexity defensively with what they're able to do because they'll have 10 games worth of reps under their belt. So I think that puts the Dolphins at 9-2. I have the Dolphins at 9-2 through the first 12 weeks of the season before this gauntlet of games. Your final 6 games include the Packers in Thanksgiving in Green Bay, home against the Jets, at Houston, who's coming off their bye, home against San Francisco, who has a mini bye before you play them, in Cleveland on Sunday Night Football, and the Browns have a mini bye, a short week or an few extra days of rest because of a Thursday game the week prior before you play them week 17, and then in New York against the Jets to close the season. So the good news is if you look at this schedule and you think that they can start fast, they can start fast. And they probably will to have the wiggle room that they need to achieve all of their goals, unless they're going to completely flip the narrative. And I think winning in week 2 would go a long way in achieving that goal. But unless you're going to completely flip the narrative that you can win these good games in cold weather or in hard environments or against the best teams in the league, the wiggle room would be much welcomed for Miami after 11 games to be sitting at 9-2, which is what I have them at. Now, I do think you go into Green Bay on Thanksgiving. That's going to be a tough environment to play. I know I've already heard from some people that are planning on traveling to the game, but it's Thanksgiving at 8:20, right? Like, realistically, Packers fans, it's a small town. They can all have their Thanksgivings at home and then go to the game. I think the crowd with the road, with the holiday, with the short week is going to be really hard for Miami to win that football game. And that's going to be a good team this year. Green Bay has made some out-of-character, aggressive free agent signings between Josh Jacobs on the offensive side of the ball and then signing Xavier McKinney on the defensive side of the ball. They completely overhauled their safety room. They have 3 rookies in Kitano Ladapo, who I was very complimentary of in the pre-draft process. Javon Bullard, who I was very complimentary of in the pre-draft process. Xavier McKinney added to those ranks as well. And then Josh Jacobs and Marshawn Lloyd, kind of this reinvestment into the running game. They moved on from Aaron Jones, but and have a first-round pick in Jordan Morgan going on the offensive line. They've added a lot to a group that got really hot down the stretch, made the playoffs, and won a playoff game. I think that's going to be a tough out for Miami. I'll pick them to lose in Green Bay against the Packers, which puts them at 9-3. Before they're home with a little extra rest to play the New York Jets for the first of the 2 games against the Jets this season. And I will pick the Dolphins to beat the Jets at home. No question. That is obviously a critical game for Miami, but the extra rest will be helpful. It's going to be welcomed to be back home. You know, it's going to be your next to last home game of the season. You've had this historical success against the Jets. You are playing the Jets late in the season. So they, as much as there's injury questions around the Dolphins, I think those same injury questions around the Jets is going to be prevalent. You know, they brought in Mike Williams, who's been banged up a lot. They brought in Tyron Smith, who's had back issues, is one of the oldest tackles in the league. Elijah Vera Tucker, how long can he stay healthy for you? I just think there's Aaron Rodgers obviously is a whole other subplot with him and the injury that he suffered last season. There's enough there with their own red tape players, in addition to all of the extra elements that play in your favor. I'll pick the Dolphins to win that game and move to 10-3 with 4 games left. You're at Houston, and the Houston game's a bummer that they're coming off a bye, because I do think that has the potential to be a game that you can really challenge. But they're coming out of playing in Jacksonville the previous week, and then they have Kansas City and Baltimore in weeks 16 and 17. If the Dolphins are going to win that game, and they're going into a short week to play Kansas City, I think that's the element that's probably the most promising for you to go to Houston, other than it's a road game late in the year that's not going to be a cold weather situation that's going to be overwhelming, or a storyline that's another layer to the game, right? I can see the pathway for Miami winning this football game. I don't think I will, because they're coming off the bye. But if you catch them looking for Kansas City and Baltimore the next 2 weeks, I don't think anybody would be foolish enough to overlook and sleep on a Dolphins team that won 11 games last year. But if there was a team that would do it, a team that is young, like Houston, might be the team that does. I'll pick them to lose that game, and that would move them to 10-4 on the season. Now you have San Francisco coming to town, and this is the game before Christmas. And the 49ers are coming off of a Thursday night game at home against the Rams the week prior. They will be home for the previous 2 weeks before that, before traveling. And then they have a big game against Detroit on Monday Night Football in week 17 the following week. I will say this. I think Miami wins at least one of the next 2 games between San Francisco at home and Cleveland on the road. San Francisco having to do the cross-country travel is nice. It's a 4:00 kick, which is a bit of a bummer for Miami and their hopes to win the game. I'll say they go 1-1 over the next 2 with that in Cleveland. Cleveland's going to be a tough matchup too, but that's another one where I think Miami, with their speed, and provided that they don't have cataclysmic offensive line depth issues this upcoming season, and you expect guys are going to miss some time, right? That's just the nature of the beast. Guys are going to get banged up. Miami's got a couple of guys that have longer than average track records. But I did a study, and I don't want to spoil too much of this. But in the last 4 seasons, there's only been 3 incidences of an NFL team that finished a season with at least 9 offensive linemen playing 300-plus snaps. The Dolphins were one. The 2 before that were the Rams in 2022, and they finished 5-12. And the Carolina Panthers in 2021, who also finished 5-12. So in the last 4 years, 3 incidences of the amount of volume played by your depth on the offensive line to a severity that Miami saw last season. There's been teams that have been sapped and had more injuries, like the Jets last year. I think they had 11 guys play over 150 snaps. 11 guys. But Isaiah Wynn was your 9th guy, and he played 392. Like, you had almost 2 full offensive lines worth play almost half the season's worth of snaps. That severity of it's only happened twice in the last 4 years. And the other 2 teams that it happened to finished 5-12. Provided you don't hit that again, which statistically speaking feels a little improbable, I think they will have the teeth to run the ball a little bit more consistently late in the year. Because that was where you felt like they kind of ran out of gas unless they could catch the edge, and it was the wide receivers making some big blocks. So you go 1-1 with San Francisco and Cleveland. How you want to split them is up to you. I think that puts you at 11-5 going into the Week 18 game against the Jets. I think there's a question of, is that enough to mathematically clinch? If so, I think you could pick the Dolphins to sit some starters, get a little extra rest, because I don't think that's enough to get the bye. I could see them dropping that game. If it's winner take all for the division, if the Jets are also in a position where they have 10 or 11 wins and could chase you down, it'd be a really entertaining game. I'd like to see it. I'd actually like to not see it and just have the starters sit. But through week 17, I have this Dolphins team at 11 wins. And I could see the pathway for more. I could see the pathway for less. But right now, if you had to have me pick a record for Miami, I think I would say either 11-5 or 11-6 or 12-5 is where I have this football team at. Expectations are high. It's a good place to be. And as we said earlier at the beginning of the show, this team is going to evolve more over the next 3 months before the start of the season. So we'll see what else they can get done that can help with those expectations being pushed even higher for more people. We'll see what comes of that. And we will see you all at the beginning of next week. I'm Kyle Krabs. You can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Fins up. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy your weekend. I'll talk to you all again on Monday.